Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, and today I'm really excited to have Josh Winning on the show with me. He's got a fantastic new book that was released yesterday. If you're listening to this live with us, if you listening to the podcast later in the week, it was this previous Tuesday. A little time travel on the fly there. But the new book is called Burn the Negative, and this is such a fun book, and I hesitate to say fun because it's a very tense book, but crafted in a very fun and exciting way. We're going to talk all about it. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about in just a minute. But Josh, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hi, it's great to be here.
It's great to have you. Josh, I like to start each show with a fun question to kind of get things going. And one thing that I love to ask people is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I started writing when I was quite young, and it was mostly taking stories that I already loved. So I grew up reading things like the Narnia books by C.S. Lewis and
Sure.
all the Roald Dahl stories. And what I used to do was I would either tell a story that was inspired by those books, or I would rewrite those books to change them more to my liking. So I would so I took The Magician's Nephew and I rewrote it to get rid of all the so-called boring stuff at the start of the book, because I just wanted them to be in Narnia immediately.
Right.
So that's kind of my earliest memory, I think.
Wow. That so how old were you um
Oh, I mean,
when you were doing that?
8, 7, 8.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So from that point on, did you know that you would be a writer, and was that your sole pursuit?
Yeah, it was just always the thing that I wanted to do. If I had a spare moment, I would just think about stories. I would start writing. It's just I was always doing it, um, and there was never really sort of like a decision or when I was a kid, I wanted to be an Olympic gymnast. That was my dream when I was about 8 years old.
As one does.
Um, Yeah, I know. Just I was doing gymnastics at the time. It wasn't just completely fabricated. Um, but yeah, I think quite quickly after I realized that was an incredibly difficult thing to do, I realized just how much I love writing and dreamed of having a book on a shelf and sort of like telling my own stories to sit alongside all the authors that I loved.
All right. You have a love and a fascination with um the uh the macabre, the creepier side of stories. Where do you think that fascination comes from?
The only thing I can think is that it comes from those amazingly creative and creepy 80s fantasy films that
Yes.
a lot of us grew up with.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, like Labyrinth, The NeverEnding Story, The Dark Crystal. Those were films essentially aimed at families, at children,
Right.
but they had such a fascinating thread of darkness running through all of them, and they didn't sort of speak down to you as a child. They really have such interesting philosophical ideas and themes. They're not just throwaway entertainment, and they didn't shy away from the darkness. And I think that that is the reason that I became interested in sort of the more horror oriented stories.
Those were such fantastic films, and you're absolutely right. They were marketed toward families, toward younger viewers, but they really were intense stories, and I feel like we've lost a bit of that. Like, I don't know if we're just scared um, of these more mature themes for younger people, or I'm not sure exactly where that got lost, but it was a really interesting time and a really interesting group of pieces of entertainment that are kind of lost to that time.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've thought about a lot over the past few years and mourning the fact that nobody is really making films like that anymore. We've got we've had the resurgence of um, Star Wars,
Right.
and obviously we had sort of reboots for the Dark Crystal and Willow, the Warwick Davis film from the 80s as well. Like, there's clearly an interest in those properties, but I think that because I do think a lot of it is to do with money. I think that these are expensive things to make, and I think Hollywood has become even more risk averse than it's ever been before. It's a very tough climate out there. So I think that if you came along and said, I want to make a film about creepy sort of vulture-like birds who live in this very unusual living world and they eat podlings, people would be like, yeah, no, I think we're just going to make another Star Wars. Actually, it's
Right.
it's a bit safer.
Right. Your first novel was a bit of an homage to that time. Is that right?
Yeah, the Shadow Glass. I mean, the title is a reference to the Dark Crystal, and it was definitely me wanting more of that kind of film, and thinking, well, if I want more of that kind of film, surely there are other people out there who want it too. So that's how I created the Shadow Glass, in order to sort of take people back, hopefully, to that feeling that they had when they first watched Labyrinth and NeverEnding Story, and sort of put an adult spin on it. Maybe,
Yeah.
it's for the people who love those films but are my age, mid-30s now, and want more too.
There's yeah, nostalgia is a strong um feeling, and we're all nostalgic for something. I think you and I would probably share nostalgia for these types of films and these stories. Other people are nostalgic for other types of things, and I know that people want to tap into that. So you wanted to kind of relive this feeling again, and to have a story that kind of honored that tradition. But then how do you go from having this feeling of nostalgia and wanting to relive this type of story to coming up with something new and something that is uniquely your own?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I knew that there were certain things that I wanted the story to have. So I knew that it clearly had to have puppets. It had to have a fantasy world that was sort of like interesting and different and philosophically rich. But I did want to tell my own story. I couldn't have attempted to replicate anything that Jim Henson or Wolfgang Peterson did, because I'm not them. I couldn't have done that. What they did was
Right.
brilliant. So my way in was actually through the main character of Jack, whose father directed a film called The Shadow Glass in the 80s, which was a puppet fantasy adventure, and it flopped, and it destroyed the relationship between the father and son. And so, the there had to be a reason for the puppets and the characters to have a story to be told, and so Jack was the reason. Once I found Jack, that was my own fresh thing that I was bringing to the story. I wasn't just rehashing previous material.
Yeah. Do you consider yourself to be a planner or a pantser? How do you approach storycraft? Do you know the story, kind of its intricacies, or at least a roadmap of it before you begin the drafting?
I'm a tortured sort of mixture of both, I would say.
I think most people kind of fall somewhere between those two.
Yeah, I do. I really try. I try so hard to plan, and often I'm able to sort of plan halfway, and then I start to lose my way a bit. I think that the magic really is in the writing for me, and I feel my way through a story as much as I um, sort of try to plan stuff out. Like, I'll maybe have set things that I know I'd like to happen, but the actual discovery of the story does happen in the moment for me.
Gotcha. Um, Also, along with your novel writing, you also are a journalist in the entertainment space. What got you interested in, and what got you plugged into doing this kind of work?
I'd kind of already been doing a very juvenile version of it. Early 2000s, I was running movie websites and I was writing movie reviews and, reading magazines like Total Film and just loving the process of examining a film and looking at its positives and negatives and trying to figure out why it worked or why it didn't work. For some reason, I just really enjoyed doing that. But I never really put it together. I never thought I could actually be an entertainment journalist because I didn't really know that they existed. Um, and I was very much wanting to write books. So when I went to my lecturer when I graduated university and said to her, I want to be an author, she kind of very kindly or very brusquely said to me that that's an incredibly difficult career path. Have you thought about journalism instead? And I hadn't, but she set me on this path. She, told me about this magazine journalism course that I could do, and that was basically a gateway into journalism.
Wow, I've gotten to meet a number of journalist turned novelist through the years, and I'm thinking I don't know that I have met any entertainment journalist per se, but I'm always fascinated with the toolkit that you acquire and develop as a journalist and how that translates to novel writing. That just the tools that you pick up and the way that you learn to perceive a situation, and by reporting on it, that the way that feeds the creative mind, if you will. How do you feel like that these two different sides, one, you're a journalist, therefore you're writing nonfiction, even though it may be about fiction, um, versus your fiction writing, where you are the god of this universe and you hold all the power. How do
Yeah.
you kind of juggle those two sides?
Well, I never felt that more than when I so both of my books have sort of a multimedia aspect. So they both contain articles, reviews, script snippets, and I thought writing a lot of those would be really straightforward and easy, but then I realized that it's a lot easier to write a feature about a film when you've interviewed somebody and they've given you all the good stuff that you need to say. So
Sure.
sitting down to write a fake film article about a fake film populated by quotes from a fake person that I came up with was actually quite difficult because when you're a journalist, you're working with what you've got, but as a
Right.
fiction writer, you've probably got nothing. At least in
Or
that specific
everything,
scenario.
depending
Well,
on how
yeah.
you look at it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. I kind of had to switch something in my brain that said, you can make this up now. And normally it's like, don't make this up. You're going to get into
Right.
legal trouble if you do. Whereas this time I was like, I can just make it up. Okay.
I love it. What things have you learned about Hollywood that maybe people would be surprised to find out?
Oh, wow. Um, it's kind of obvious, but there really are so many people involved in a film that you never see. There
Right.
are just so many people. There's a job for everything.
Well, I
Um,
think anyone that stayed to the end of the movie and watched all
yeah,
those credits scroll by, you're like, who are all these people and where are they during this whole process?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's quite something to see it when if you go onto a movie set and you see all these people working on the same thing that the big Hollywood stars are, and you think, geez, yeah, this is like a huge operation. No wonder it takes such drive to actually get a film made. You assume that to get a film made, you just get a script, get a director, get a cast, get a location, off you go. But it's a huge undertaking.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think yeah, I'd say that's one of the biggest things.
Yeah. Your new book, Burn the Negative. was that inspired by anything that you have witnessed or been involved with? Is there a real life inspiration behind this book?
Yeah, it's a real hodgepodge of a lot of different experiences that I've had. The movie set is a big thing, but the sort of gem of the idea was when I met Lorraine Warren, who is the paranormal investigator. She was very famous for investigating the Amityville horror. She's played by Vera Farmiga in the Conjuring films. She spent her life investigating so-called hauntings and ghosts and possessions. And I met her because I was reporting on The Conjuring 2. So I went to her house and had a chat with her. We all went out for dinner afterwards. She took me down into the occult museum that was below her house. And I just always thought I would really love to write about a psychic one day. I don't know if I believe in them, but I found it really fascinating that she truly believed. She really did believe. Um, so that was the starting point, and it only really sort of congealed into anything when I thought, what if there was a psychic who's actually sort of a skeptic, and they're not like any of the psychics you've seen in these movies? They're not like Zelda Rubinstein who comes along to try to save everybody. The psychic in Burn the Negative couldn't care less, and frankly doesn't want to be there, doesn't believe in cursed movies. So that for me was like, aha, okay, I think maybe this is something.
Anyone that has an occult museum in their house, uh, I think you have to sit up and take notice, that's someone that you want to pick their brain a little bit.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, she saw the museum as sort of like a bit of an air locker where she's sort of keeping all of this negative energy just trapped here and making it safe.
Mm,
And I think, there would be a priest who came in to bless all the artifacts. Um, so she saw it not so much as sort of like an amusement park, but an actual, a bit like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, somewhere to actually keep all of this bad juju.
yeah. What kind of feeling did you get when you went down, and was there anything in there that tickled your borderline skeptic brain?
No, no, it was all, it really was a bit of a circus of horrors down there. It was lots of, very innocuous looking things that were dressed up with, like, spooky red lighting and stuff, and, it was kind of sweet, I thought, actually.
We've heard urban legends and things over the years about movie sets that are haunted or weird things happen. I can think of some horror movies in the 70s and 80s that have these legends that build up around them, and then it gets to the point where you're not sure if that was true or not, or maybe a little thing happened and it snowballed through the decades. Are there any real stories that you're aware of movie scenes that have gone horribly bad, or movie sets? And is there any truth to some of these things that we've heard?
Yeah, as you said, there are a lot of stories. A lot of them are sort of around that moment in Hollywood where there was sort of like occult focused horror films, so like The
Yeah.
Omen and The Exorcist, and um, yeah, so there are stories about people who died involved in the production. Really quite tragic, awful things that happened to people, and that is interesting because terrible things happen all the time on movie sets. Accidents happen. They happen on all kinds of films, action films, comedies, but it's the horror films that get branded with this curse
Right.
sort of stamp. And I just wonder why. And that's kind of a bit why I went down the cursed movie route with this book, because I think there's sort of like there's a tragedy to what happened to these people. But then it doesn't prevent people being really sort of morbidly curious about the reality of it all.
Yeah. When prepping to write this book, did you research some of those movie sets that have these legends around them, and what did you find out?
Yeah, I did skim through a few of them. I mean, a lot of them had already been handed down to me through, the urban legend movie machine. So I
Yeah.
was aware of a lot of them already. Um, things like The Wizard of Oz. There's stories about The Wizard of Oz with the problem with the paint that was put on the Tin Man and how it was actually suffocating the actor. And there's
Mm.
rumors that you can see a munchkin hanging in the background of one scene. It's really, really grisly stuff. Um, and it's all. I think that it's part of the movie magic. I think Hollywood is so great at telling stories, and it's part of the experience. Watching a horror film, you want to be scared, and then this sort of cursed movie idea allows the horror to sort of transfer into real life and keep that experience going for the viewer. It's a funny phenomenon.
Yeah. There's a theme or subtext to this book, about the price of fame and what are you willing to trade or to pay for this exalted status. I'm always really fascinated by themes and whether the idea of a theme is present in the beginning or in the writing, or and I've heard from so many people that say when the book is finished, when they finish that first draft and they're looking back over it, these themes emerge and they weren't even really aware of it, but these things just kind of work themselves out in the writing. Were themes on your mind in this, or was it like so many other people say?
Yeah, I don't know if this counts as a theme, but I definitely always have a single word that I keep in my mind when I'm working on a particular book. So with Burn the Negative, the word was truth, which is a very generic kind of word, but it
Yeah.
actually informed Laura, the main character, massively because she is a journalist. It's her job to find out the truth, to report the truth, and yet she is sort of at the center of this supposed movie curse, which could not be true. And so that was a fun thing to flip around with across her arc. Just be like, okay, well, at the moment she is telling other people's truth so that nobody cares about hers. And as the book goes on, her relationship with the truth changes. So for me, I think it is more of a word that I sort of try to hang things on.
Yeah. When you're writing horror or suspense, there's an interesting um play with emotions that happens for the reader, especially because if it's just a gruesome fest from beginning to end, the reader will grow weary, and there's very little emotional range, and that's one of the key pieces that a writer gets to play with is manipulating the reader's emotions, this up and down, so that the ups are more impactful and the downs are more impactful because you're taking them on a journey, and this book is no different. You inject moments of levity into the book with great skill, and are those things that you think about when you're writing the book, that the creepy can't just happen on every page, that you need to kind of dole them out a little bit so that the reader is anticipating and almost in that anticipation, um, works themselves up without you having to do anything. It's, setting the stage and then letting their own imagination and emotions sort of run wild. And I've always admired that about horror writers, suspense writers, is the ability to to pace that story. Were those things that you were thinking about when you're writing this, and how
Yeah.
exactly the reader is going to react to this part of the journey?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that you have to earn those big horror moments, and you're right. If you keep punching something, it's gonna fall apart eventually. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm definitely aware of that. The the rhythm, I guess, of the story. You know, you have those peaks, and then you have the quieter recovery, sort of what's the word? Sort of like the recovery moment,
Right.
where you regroup, and that's the moment where you can be funny, maybe. And characters, I just think people are generally funny. You know, people, the way they talk, the way they think is quite
Sure.
funny. And I grew up sort of devouring shows like Friends, and Spin City, Caroline in the City, like Frasier, all of these great American sitcoms that showed in the UK on like a Friday and a Saturday night. And so I think in my head, dialogue often is that kind of snappy sitcom style, which maybe is something that comes out. Not, I'm not saying that I am anywhere near as funny as those writers, but that general feeling or that style definitely, I think, comes through from those shows that I grew up on.
Yeah. Your main character of Laura. Do you do you see a lot of yourself in that character, and were you writing yourself into the story in a way?
I kind of think that she's maybe like a more extreme version of me. Um, her her snappiness and her intolerance of anything sort of mildly irritating is definitely me, but multiplied. Um, the fact that she sort of says things that then she regrets or sort of upset people, that's something that I feel I do. I don't know if I actually do that in real life, but I often think that I put my foot in my mouth, and it's something that really frustrates me about myself. So it was great to put that into Laura instead, and see maybe a more extreme version of that.
Yeah. If this book gets made into a movie, which would be the most meta thing that I've seen in a while, who do you think who do you think would be a good fit to bring this to the silver screen?
Oh, in terms of directors,
Yeah, the directors and who do you think would their style would fit this?
I I know that John Carpenter doesn't really make many films nowadays, but I feel like he would be quite an interesting choice. Not only because I love John Carpenter and would love to meet him, but he has that grittiness. He has that slight tongue-in-cheek thing. He knows the genre inside and out. His style is just sort of like slick, but not overly so. Um, so I could definitely see John Carpenter doing this. If he called me
That'd
up,
be
I'd say,
great.
"All right, John, why not?"
That would be amazing. When a reader gets to the end of the story and closes that back cover and they've gone on this journey with you, what do you hope readers are left with?
I hope they're a little bit scared. I hope they're sort of unsettled by what has happened. I hope they sort of understand Laura in a funny kind of way. Um, and I just kind of hope that they felt themselves being sort of dragged along on this wild Hollywood horror show.
Love it. Burn the Negative is available everywhere now. Go visit your local bookstore, support local books, and pick up your copy. If you don't have a great local bookstore near you, we'll put links to Amazon in the show notes where you can grab it from there. Is this available as an audiobook, Josh? I didn't look before we started.
It is.
Yeah. Uh, have you listened to
Yeah,
any of it
Stephanie
yet?
Cannon is the narrator, and she's done such a great job. I'm so
Nice.
happy. Her Needleman voice is terrifying, and she captures the characters really, really well. She's just done such a great job.
I love it. We'll put links to the Audible as well. Josh, if people are just discovering you and want to follow along with all the great stuff that you're up to, where's a good place where they can connect with you online and follow along?
I'm on Twitter at Josh Winning. I'm on Instagram at Joshua Winning. And if you want to go old school, I do have a website, and that is joshuawinning.com.
Excellent. We'll link those up as well. Josh, I love the book and can't wait for everyone to grab their copy of Burn the
Thank you.
Negative. And please come back and join us again sometime.
I would love to. Thank you so much for having me.
All right.